The fog lifted just enough to reveal the fence line when he saw the foal again, standing where the meadow dipped toward the creek, its small body outlined in silver light. He stopped walking, because stopping had become a kind of prayer, and because the animal had not fled the way wild things always did. Instead it waited, ears tilted forward, as if listening for a sound only it could hear. The man felt the old ache stir in his chest, the one he carried like a folded letter he never opened, and he wondered whether waiting was something that could be learned or only endured. He had come to this land to disappear. The cabin was spare, the mornings colder than memory, and his days followed the narrow track of survival rather than desire. He worked the fence, split wood, brewed coffee he often forgot to drink. Names had thinned in his mind. The past had learned how to knock without being invited. When he noticed a foal's ribs and the raw mark at its neck, he felt a familiar impulse to turn away, to leave the story unfinished so it could not finish him in return. The foal took a tentative step, then another, hooves whispering against damp grass. Its coat was dulled by mud, its legs too long for its balance, but its eyes held a steadiness that unsettled him. He had known that look once, in a mirror that belonged to another life. He knelt because standing felt like a lie, and because the ground was honest. The foal halted within arm's reach, breath fluttering, and the space between them tightened with a shared uncertainty that felt like a beginning. He did not touch it. He let his hands rest open on his thighs, palms empty as a promise not yet broken. The creek murmured, birds stitched the air with small sounds, and the fog continued its retreat. He became aware of his own breathing, of the way it slowed when he allowed the quiet to hold him. The foal's nostrils flared. It leaned forward, then back, testing the gravity of trust. The man thought of the first night after the loss, how the house had felt larger than weather, how the rooms echoed with what could not be said. He had learned to measure time by tasks, not feelings, because feelings were wild and ran. Yet here was a creature that had not run, that had chosen proximity over safety, and the choice pressed against him like a question with no correct answer. He stood slowly and took a step away. The foal startled, stamped, and let out a thin, broken sound that cut through him. He froze, shame rising, because he had not meant to cause harm. He had only meant to escape. He sank back down, murmuring nothing, offering stillness as apology. The foal settled again, confusion easing, and the air released its grip. That was when he noticed the absence. The meadow should have held another presence, a larger shadow, a rhythm that steadied the small one's fear. There were hoof prints that circled and ended, grass pressed flat as if by vigil. He followed the line with his eyes until it dissolved near the trees, and understanding moved through him like cold water. The foal was alone not by chance, but by consequence. A wind shifted, carrying the scent of earth and loss. He felt the decision forming before he named it, a muscle memory of staying when leaving would have been easier. He removed his jacket and placed it on the ground, a small island of warmth. The foal sniffed, hesitated, then stepped onto it, hooves sinking into fabric that still carried his heat. The contact was accidental, unavoidable, and it tethered them. Time bent. The sun climbed. He fetched water and set it down without ceremony. He backed away, watched from a distance that honored the foal's fear. When it drank, awkward and urgent, relief washed through him with a tenderness he had forgotten how to handle. He laughed once, surprised by the sound, and covered his mouth as if laughter were a fragile thing that might break. By afternoon, the fog was gone, replaced by a clarity that felt almost cruel. He understood the risk now. If he stayed, he would be responsible. If he left, the outcome would not absolve him. The foal had lain down on the jacket, legs folded wrong, eyes half closed. It slept in fits, waking to check that he remained. Each time it found him still there, its breathing eased. A truck passed on the distant road, a reminder of other lives moving forward. He imagined making the call, handing the story to someone trained to close it properly. He imagined walking back to the cabin and locking the door against hope. The images tasted like ash. He chose instead to gather fallen branches and lean them against the fence, shaping a shelter that was barely a thing, but more than nothing. As dusk approached, the temperature dropped. He lit a small fire in a pit he hadn't used in years. The flames coaxed color back into the meadow, gold and shadow trading places. The foal stood and drifted closer, drawn by warmth and the man's steady presence. When it pressed its forehead against his knee, the contact was brief and trembling, but it landed like a verdict. He did not cry. He felt the tears line up and stand down, because this was not about release but resolve. He rested his hand against the foal's neck, feeling the pulse there, alive and insistent. The scarred skin flinched, then accepted him. In that acceptance, something in him unlocked, not all at once, but enough to let light in. Night arrived with stars sharp as nails. The foal refused to leave his side, even when the darkness widened. He sat with it until the fire burned low, until the land settled into a deeper quiet. The central truth rose, undeniable and fierce. This was a crossing. Whatever had been broken in them had recognized its counterpart, and neither would survive another abandonment. When the foal lay down again and slept without starting, he stayed awake, keeping watch, and in that vigil, the story took its first irreversible step. He understood then that tomorrow would demand names, calls, and courage, and that tonight demanded only presence. As the foal's breath matched the rhythm of the land, he felt chosen, terrified, and alive, standing at the edge of a life that had finally turned toward him. Dawn came quietly, as if unwilling to disturb the fragile agreement forged in darkness. The fire had collapsed into a bed of coals, and the man's legs were stiff from keeping still. But he did not move right away. The foal slept on its side now, ribs lifting and falling with steadier rhythm, one ear flicking at insects that dared to land. The sight carried a strange authority, as if rest itself were a promise the world was making to them both. He rose slowly, joints protesting, and tested the air. Cold lingered, but the worst of the night had passed. He walked to the creek, washed his hands, and let the water numb him into clarity. When he returned, the foal was awake, watching him with a calm that felt earned rather than given. It stood, unsteady but determined, and followed as he took a few careful steps toward the shelter he had thrown together. The jacket was damp with dew. He lifted it, shook it out, and draped it over the branches to block the wind. The foal nosed at the fabric, reassured by the familiar scent, and stepped beneath it without being asked. He felt the shift then, subtle but irrevocable. The day before had been an encounter. This was a commitment. He fetched grain from the cabin, pouring it into a shallow pan he hadn't used since another lifetime. He set it down and retreated, letting the foal approach on its own terms. When it ate, slowly at first, then with urgency, he noticed the way its tail swished, the way its eyes softened. He noticed, too, the way his own shoulders lowered, as if he'd been bracing against a storm that was finally moving on. By mid-morning, sound returned to land. A crow argued with the sky. The creek laughed over stones. A neighbor's dog barked once and fell silent. He worked the fence with a new attention, mending breaks that had waited years for his hands. The foal shadowed him, stopping when he stopped, starting when he did. It was not obedience. It was alignment, a mirroring that felt ancient. Each time he looked down and found it there, a warm pressure gathered behind his eyes, and he swallowed it back, choosing usefulness over unraveling. When a pickup truck slowed on the road, he felt a flicker of panic. The world, he realized, would have opinions. He stood between the foal and the sound, his body learning the shape of protection without instruction. The truck passed, indifferent, and the panic ebbed, leaving resolve in its wake. He could not control who came or what they said, but he could control whether he fled at the first sign of witness. The sun climbed, heat drawing the fog's memory from the grass. He led the foal toward the shade of a cottonwood, speaking nothing, letting the cadence of his steps do the talking. When the foal stumbled, he waited. When it recovered, he smiled, the expression unfamiliar but welcome. He thought of how patience had once been a virtue he practiced without noticing, how grief had taught him to rush or freeze instead. Here, slowness was not a failure, but a language. A woman from the neighboring ranch arrived just after noon, her truck crunching to a stop. She stepped out carefully, hat in hand, eyes taking in the scene without comment. The foal tensed. The man placed a hand at its shoulder, grounding both of them. The woman's gaze softened. She did not ask questions that demanded answers. She offered water, a halter, information delivered gently, as if she knew that too much truth at once could bruise. They spoke of the mare that had gone down near the North Ridge, of coyotes kept at bay by luck and vigilance. The words settled heavy but necessary. The foal pressed closer to the man, choosing him without ceremony. The woman nodded once, understanding more than she said. She promised to return with supplies, and left them to quiet again. In the afternoon, the foal tested distance, wandering a few yards away before circling back. Each return was a small victory. Each expiration of breath held and released. The man found himself narrating his movements aloud, not to teach but to steady himself. His voice sounded different in the open air, less brittle, more forgiving. He laughed again, louder this time, when the foal attempted a clumsy trot and nearly outran its courage. As the day leaned toward evening, clouds gathered, bruised purple at the edges. Thunder rolled far off, a warning rather than a threat. He reinforced the shelter, tied the halter loosely, leaving room for choice. When rain began, soft and persistent, he stood with the foal beneath the branches, sharing the small, dry space. The sound wrapped him in a private world, each drop a stitch pulling the day closed. The storm passed as quickly as it came, leaving the land washed and luminous. A rainbow arced faintly, incomplete but enough. The foal leaned into him, not in fear now, but in rest. He felt the weight of it, literal and symbolic, and accepted both. He understood that this bond would draw others, that it would ask things of him he had long avoided. He understood, too, that avoidance had never kept him safe. When night returned, it found him prepared. He lit the fire earlier, fed the foal, checked the fence one last time. He sat beside the shelter, watching stars prick the sky. The foal lay down and slept deeply, trusting the night to hold. The man let himself imagine tomorrow not as a threat, but as a sequence of care. The central conflict had sharpened into focus, to remain open in a world that had taught him close, to protect without possession, to stay. As the land breathed around them, he felt the old life loosening its grip, replaced by a purpose that did not shout but endured, steady as the foal's sleeping heart beside him. Morning arrived with clarity that felt earned. The air held the clean edge left behind by rain, and the meadow gleamed as if the night had polished it. The man woke before the birds, not because he had slept poorly, but because anticipation had taken up residence in his bones. He rose, stretched, and listened. The foal was already awake, standing with its head lowered, watching it with an attentiveness that no longer startled but steadied him. He moved through his routines with intention. Coffee this time was poured and finished. He checked the shelter, tightened a knot, brushed damp leaves aside. When he returned, the foal followed without being asked, its steps surer, its curiosity widening. He noticed how it tested the ground, how it paused to consider, how it chose to proceed. He recognized himself in those moments and felt the quiet ache of kinship deepen. By late morning, the road brought visitors. Not crowds, not spectacle, just a trickle of people drawn by rumor and the simple gravity of care. A boy arrived first, no older than 10, eyes too old for his face. He stood at the fence, hands shoved into pockets, pretending disinterest while studying the foal with hunger. The man opened the gate and waited. The boy stepped through, cautious, reverent. The foal approached him, nostrils flaring, and the boy held still as if the world had asked him a question he finally knew how to answer. When the foal brushed past his arm, the boy smiled, a quick flash that vanished almost as soon as it appeared, but the man saw it and it mattered. An older man came next, shoulders stooped by years and something heavier. He did not cross the fence. He leaned on it, eyes fixed on the foal, breathing deep as if relearning how. The man said nothing, and neither did the visitor. Silence did the work. When the older man left, his gait was unchanged, but his eyes had softened, as if a knot had loosened somewhere out of sight. The afternoon brought a test. The wind shifted, carrying a scent that snapped the foal's head up, muscles tightening. It bolted a few steps, panic sharp and sudden, and the man felt fear rise with it, fast and bright. He did not chase. He spoke softly, grounding himself first, then the space between them. The foal wheeled, hesitated, and returned, breath ragged but willing. The return felt like a triumph earned by restraint rather than control. He knelt and let the foal come to him. When it did, pressing close, the man's hand shook and he let them. Word spread, not loudly, not far, but enough to alter the shape of days. The neighbor woman returned with hay and medicine, with stories of others who might come. The man listened and nodded. His attention split between her words and the foal's steady presence. He understood that this place was becoming a threshold, a place where people paused before deciding how to step back into their lives. The responsibility pressed on him, heavy but welcome. As dusk approached, the sky darkened with promise. He sensed it before he named it, the way animals do when weather gathers intent. The foal grew restless, circling, testing the fence. The man followed, keeping pace, speaking calm into the air. Thunder rolled closer this time, not distant but insistent. Rain came in sheets, drenching the land, turning the ground slick. The foal slipped and fell, scrambling to rise, fear igniting again. He reached it in 3 strides, sliding on the mud, heart pounding. He did not grab, did not restrain. He placed his body between the foal and the fence, creating a barrier of flesh and will. He spoke its name, not the official one, not yet, but the sound he'd been using, a low, steady call. The foal stilled, trembling, then leaned into him, weight heavy and real. The rain soaked them both. Lightning split the sky, close enough to rattle teeth. He held, not to own, but to anchor. When the storm broke, it did so suddenly, leaving the world stunned into silence. The foal stood, legs braced, and shook itself, spraying water and mud. It stepped away, then turned back, eyes bright. It touched its forehead to the man's chest and stayed there, breathing hard, alive. The moment stretched, fragile and immense. He laughed and cried at once, the sounds tangled and honest, and did not try to stop either. Night fell gently, stars emerging through torn clouds. The visitors had gone, the land reclaimed its quiet. He fed the foal and watched it eat with a confidence that had not been there days ago. He checked the shelter, the fence, the fire. Each task felt like a vow renewed. He sat beside the foal as it lay down, close enough to feel the warmth of its body, far enough to honor its space. In the hush, he felt the conflict sharpen, no longer abstract but immediate. Staying would mean opening himself to scrutiny, to failure, to loss repeated in new forms. Leaving would mean betraying a trust that had chosen him without words. He understood that the foal's refusal to leave his side was not need but recognition, a mirror held up to his own long vigil beside grief. He could not unsee it. As the foal drifted into sleep, he made his choice without ceremony. He would build slowly, carefully, letting the place teach him how. He would ask for help when needed and offer it when he could. He would stay present when fear arrived and let patience speak. The land exhaled. The stars burned steady and the foal slept deeply. At the edge of the firelight, the man felt the future take its first, deliberate breath, thrilling and uncertain, and he stayed to meet it. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both fragile and inevitable. Morning light spilled across the meadow, and the foal greeted it with a cautious confidence, lifting its head as if to measure the day before stepping into it. The man rose with the sun now, not because sleep escaped him, but because purpose had learned how to knock gently. He brewed coffee and drank it warm. He checked the fence and found fewer gaps. He spoke aloud without flinching at the sound of his own voice. The foal tested itself in increments. A longer trot, a brief canter that ended in a delighted, startled hop. Each success carried the echo of risk, and each recovery stitched courage into muscle. The man watched without hovering, hands busy with small repairs, eyes always returning. He learned the difference between vigilance and control, between being needed and being trusted. The foal returned to him after every exploration, not because it had to, but because it chose to, and that choice steadied him more than any promise. People came with their own careful distances. A teenage girl arrived one afternoon, hood pulled low, foam clenched like armor. She stood apart, pretending to scroll while watching the foal out of the corner of her eye. The man did not invite her closer. He sat on an overturned bucket and waited. The foal approached her first, curious, unafraid. When it nudged her sleeve, she startled, then laughed, a sound that surprised her into stillness. She put the phone away. She stayed until the sun dipped, then left without a goodbye, shoulders lighter than when she'd arrived. An older woman followed days later, carrying a tin of biscuits and a story she didn't tell. She brushed the foal with a tenderness that came from practice, tears slipping without ceremony. The man learned to recognize these moments as arrivals rather than interruptions. He learned to offer space instead of answers. The land did the rest. Not every day was gentle. One morning, a coyote crossed a far ridge, and the foal spooked, fear sharp and old. The man's heart raced. His hands remembered loss. He resisted the urge to grab, to cage safety. He breathed, spoke low, stepped into the space the foal needed filled. The animal steadied, trembling, then stilled. The coyote vanished. The lesson lingered. Fear passed faster when met without panic. Supplies accumulated quietly. Hay stacked near the shelter. A proper trough replaced the pan. The neighbor woman brought paperwork and a measured smile. There were calls to make, permissions to seek, questions that would not accept silence forever. The man felt the weight of them, but it no longer bent him double. He set aside an hour each afternoon to address what had once overwhelmed him. He found that action, taken in pieces, could loosen the grip of dread. One evening, as the light softened and shadows lengthened, the foal stumbled again, this time not from fear, but fatigue. The man moved closer, offering a shoulder. The foal leaned, heavy and trusting, and rested. He felt the warmth through his shirt, the steady beat of a heart learning resilience. He thought of how many times he had needed a place to lean and found none. He stayed still until the foal found its balance and stepped away. The place began to change in ways that were difficult to name. Laughter threaded the afternoons. Silence grew less sharp. The fence became a boundary that welcomed rather than warned. The man noticed that he slept through the night now, dreams no longer ambushing him at dawn. When grief surfaced, it came without teeth, a memory rather than a sentence. He understood that healing was not erasure but integration, a weaving that made room for both scar and strength. A storm gathered late one day, not the violent kind, but the kind that pressed humidity into the air and set nerves humming. The foal paced, restless. The man walked with it, matching its steps, letting motion speak. Thunder rolled overhead, distant and uncommitted. Rain fell softly, then stopped. The sky cleared into a wash of pink and blue that felt like an apology. The foal lifted its head and whinnied, a sound thin but certain. The man laughed, startled by joy. As night settled, he sat by the fire and considered the shape of what was forming. It was no longer just a rescue, not a favor extended until it became inconvenient. It was a practice, a way of meeting the world that asked for patience and returned meaning. He felt the thrill of it then, the dangerous, luminous understanding that staying would change him again and again. The foal lay down nearby, sleep deep and untroubled, and the man felt the future draw closer, not as a threat, but as an invitation he was finally ready to accept. Now, click on the video on the screen to hear a story even more miraculous than this one. You'll cry and then feel whole again. Click it now, we'll be waiting.